I heard some good advice recently. I don't know how it fits into a sermon, so I'm just going to put it out there right now, and then you'll have it. No one will protect your time but you. Nobody is going to protect your time except for you. And that person then went on to talk about how things, get so busy. And they said this other quotable thing: don't prioritize your schedule. Don't take the 15 things you got going on and say, well, these are the 5 most important. Or don't prioritize your schedule. She said, schedule your priorities. Take the 5 things that are most important and put them on the calendar. So, last weekend, we got back from vacation. And we got back on Saturday, and man, we jumped right into it. Sunday night, we had this church event. Monday night, Lisa had a meeting. Tuesday night, I had a meeting. Thursday night, I had a meeting. Friday night, Lisa had a meeting. And so we said, man, Wednesday is our only time. And so we said, family movie night. We're doing family movie night. And Carl, he's 4. And so we kind of told him, we're going to do a family movie night. We're going to make popcorn. He said, we can bring the mattresses down and put them on the living room floor. Now, and Lisa and I, we have a king-size mattress. It's a hassle. But we brought their mattresses down and put them on the floor. And we watched a movie. And it was fun. We watched Saving Private Ryan. I thought, perfect time to teach him about war. No, we did not. We did not do that. We watched a kids' animated movie. It was a good time. And we've since watched it at least 2 more times. That's how that works. But in this movie, there was a scene. So you got all the people, these friends decide they're going to make this team to go after the bad guy. And so one of the guys in the team says, this is our origin story. He was very excited about that. But it's interesting, though, because all stories that we pay attention to, all movies, not just kids' ones, they have these elements of explanation where they tell you what's going on. Here's what's going on in the world, and here's who your characters are, and sometimes they're good about telling you, and sometimes they're like, this is my mom. Like, it's really obvious. But anyway, they all have these elements where they introduce the story. And the Bible is the exact same in that. Sometimes it has to really give you the details, what's going on, and the context, as they talk about so often in Bible study. So I want to read to you just the first 2 verses of 1 Kings chapter 18, and then I'm going to tell you a story that I've preached on before, so many of you are going to be familiar with, so I'll just paraphrase, then we'll read some more. But 1 Kings chapter 18 begins with this. Later on, in the 3rd year of the drought, the Lord said to Elijah, go and present yourself to King Ahab. Tell him that I will soon send rain. So Elijah went to appear before Ahab. Meanwhile, the famine had become very severe in Samaria. So this is what's going on, okay? God tells Elijah, go the news. So Elijah goes. This is the time, though, that Elijah has this big showdown with the prophets of Baal. Elijah is the last living prophet of God because the people have been killing them. They don't want to hear from the Lord. They've been worshiping Baal, this false god, and but they're in a drought for 3 years, and they've been asking for help and praying for help. So Elijah gets with these prophets, says, bring up your prophets of Baal. There's 450 of them. He says, you against me. Here's what we're going to do. And remember, he says, let's burn a bull as a burnt offering to our God. And so he says, Baal, you guys go first. Just set up the bull there on the burn pit, and then just pray that Baal just lights it on fire, and that'll be fine. And so they pray and they try and they do crazy things. They're screaming, they're cutting themselves, just trying to do. And Elijah's mocking them, making fun of them. Saying, pray louder. Maybe he's asleep. He's really messing with them. Fire never falls. They give up. And then Elijah's turn. And he says, let's soak the thing with water. Let's make it soaking wet so it couldn't possibly burn. He prays one time. Boom, fire comes down. And there it goes. And the people are like, wow, I guess maybe his God is the real God. And then the story goes on that Elijah then says, all right, take all those 450 dudes, put them down in this valley. And then the Bible just says, and Elijah killed them. And then we come to the remainder of this story, verse 41. Then Elijah said to Ahab, the king, go get something to eat and drink, for I hear a mighty rainstorm coming. So Ahab went to eat and drink, but Elijah climbed to the top of Mount Carmel and bowed low to the ground and prayed with his face between his knees. And then he said to his servant, "Go and look out toward the sea." The servant went and looked, then returned to Elijah and said, "I didn't see anything." 7 times Elijah told him to go and look, and finally, the 7th time, the servant told him, "I saw a little cloud about the size of a man's hand rising from the sea." Then Elijah shouted, "Hurry to Ahab and tell him, climb into your chariot and go back home. If you don't hurry, the rain will stop you." And soon the sky was black with clouds. A heavy wind brought a terrific rainstorm. So that's the story. Do you remember, do you see this? We were on vacation. I saw this every time we drove into the park. I think they've got one at Thompson Run. Smokey the Bear's rainbow signals of fire. Like it goes, you got green, blue, yellow, orange, red. This, we're not going to have any forest fires today. And then it says, so it's low, I think maybe medium, then high, very high, and extreme. This is threat of forest fire, okay? He's saying, douse the bull, get it wet. Let's get it to green. No chance this is going to burn. But they're in year 3 of a drought. The land is dry. They're not yellow. They're not orange. They're red. There's an extreme likelihood of fire out here. That's a real threat. Of course, Smokey the Bear hadn't been born yet back when they wrote this, but they didn't even have the wheel. They had the wheel. They didn't have the fire wheel. But this is a dry place. So Elijah called down fire when fire was super dangerous and not needed. Then the story tells us that Elijah takes the 450 prophets in the valley and he kills them. It doesn't say how, but it's 1 against 450. Probably fire. It's a pretty good way to get him in a valley. There's nowhere to go, and then just probably fire is what he used to kill him. Then he returns to the top of Mount Carmel, starts to pray for rain. When Smokey's arm is over here, what you need is rain. So he goes up to pray for rain. Remember, verse 1, year 3 of a drought. The whole time, rain was always what was needed. And verse 2 told us that there was famine in the land. If the rain doesn't fall, the crops don't grow. And if the crops don't grow, you don't eat, right? There's famine in the land. There's a good reason for the thing with the fire and the bulls, the prophets of Baal. It was needed, okay? But rain was always what had been needed. Rain was always what was needed. In fact, remember the message God had for Ahab was go tell the king that I'm going to send rain. That was God's message, God's plan. So then Elijah starts praying, and it's 7 times. It's wild to me that he's got to pray for it 7 times. He had to go through this prayer 7 times before God answered with what had always been needed and had been promised. But it reminds me, as I think about it, of this whole ordeal with Baal's prophets. He's like, no, pray again. Pray louder. Try again. Maybe just pray harder. He's mocking them, right? And yet it takes him 7 prayers. He's the great prophet of God, the real God, the living God who created all things, who doesn't sleep, who hears everything. It took 7 prayers before God sent rain. The origin story in this story is a dry world. Harsh, uncomfortable. This world is angry. This world is violent. Because when resources get scarce, people get aggressive. They get defensive and protective. Elijah sets up this showdown, and he mocks, and he shows off he's arrogant. He fits right in. And he does what seems obvious. He calls down fire in this arid land, and fire comes. And when he has won, he kills his opponents. It fits the world he was in. The origin story tells us that this makes sense for his context. And what we see is that when you think about it, fire was easy, but fire was not what was needed. It makes so much sense for this context that the people who had been following any god but the real God, who were worshiping Baal and following these false prophets, man, verse 38 says the fire instantly fell. And verse 39 says, and when all the people saw it, they fell down on the ground and cried out, the Lord, He is God. Yes, the Lord, He is God. Rain is what they needed. Elijah prayed for rain, but it didn't come, so he prayed more. It is interesting to me, again, that he didn't get up to check if the rain was coming. He sent a messenger. So he knew he had to pray harder. He wasn't mad or embarrassed that the rain wasn't falling, even though he had prayed, the mighty Elijah had prayed. Think about that. That's a big deal. He just prayed for fire. He'd just proven God's glory. He'd just gotten all those evil people to bow down on their face and praise the Lord. And then he goes up and pray for rain, and nothing happens. And he has the, maybe humility, to not get embarrassed or upset and just hunker down and keep going. He knew God had promised the rain. In a land that is dry, among a people who are lost, fire is an easy prayer, but rain is not. The context of the story, the origin of the situation was one where fire is an easy prayer, but rain is not. But rain is what is needed, and rain is what God wants to deliver. As I imagine this story, I start to think about some of the movies that I saw when I was a kid, like Conan the Barbarian and Beastmaster. Do you remember these movies? So here's, it's all the desert, all the dry. People are in the old-timey clothes, wearing the furs, carrying swords, riding camels and horses. Now, that's all make-believe stuff. Those movies are, but it's not really accurate to that time in history, but it's probably closer to how things appeared than today appears to then. And that's what I'm imagining. The story just seems greatly removed from the current world, from our current life. There would never be a showdown between prophets today. We're not burning bulls. Okay, none of that. Except this thing about easy versus what is needed, that resonates. God's desire and God's plan was always to send rain. The thing that wasn't easy, that wasn't the first inclination of the day, that wasn't expected, that didn't fit in with how things were going. That was God's plan, and I think that is probably still God's plan. Will that shock you this morning if I make the declaration that God is countercultural? Is that shocking to you? There's a reason that we speak of the way of the world and the way of God, because they tend to be different, if not opposite. Jesus' life and his message made this more clear. What Jesus is about hasn't fit with the ways of the world. I mean, since Adam and Eve were expelled from the garden, the ways of the world have been counter to what Jesus was about. So if you're sitting here as a fully devoted follower of Jesus Christ today, is it a fair assumption for me to assume you've experienced some of the discomfort, some of the lack of fit, the rejection from the world? There are things that don't feel right here on earth when you've decided that your home is not here on earth. Now, this isn't bad news. You aren't doomed to suffer. The truth is more in line with what Elijah knew and demonstrated on Mount Carmel. The easy way is probably not in your future, but the right way is God's way. The big doctrinal thesis of Jesus' life, which, that's just the collection of his ideas and work, This big theme is the Sermon on the Mount. We find it's all his main points and his big ideas. It's Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. 3 chapters, all red letters. This is what Jesus said. A Sermon on the Mount. The message begins, the very first thing that Jesus shares is a section called the Beatitudes. I want to read those for you today, and I want to share them from 2 different Bible translations. This is kind of a familiar passage of Scripture, so I want to read it from the King James Version. This is, the oldest collected Bible. This is the first one. So I'm going to read you Matthew chapter 5, verses 2 through 12. And Jesus opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are they who do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. Do you hear it in those words? Here is a circumstance or a characteristic that we in the world see as negative and undesirable. And Jesus says they are blessed, for God has granted them something or has promised them something yet to come. The way the world has lined things up for them, the way they have chosen to go on this planet, has left them with this thing that we would see as maybe a curse even. And Jesus says, it's not as it seems. Do you ever feel poor in spirit? Has the world taken more out of you than you think you really have? Have you spent your passion and your energy and you feel empty? Are you mourning? Have you lost precious things? Does your heart ache for those who have gone on without ever knowing the Lord? Have you learned from negative experiences to keep your head down? Have you been humbled? Have you learned to keep your opinion and your ideas to yourself? Have you been taught to keep it quiet? Are you meek? Are you hungering and thirsting for this world to get right? Do you long for righteousness? Have you given up on this idea of what you have every right to? Have you taken the stance of the merciful? Have you been diligent to protect your heart and your mind from all the filth of this world? Do you ever feel like you don't fit around here simply because of your purity? Are you tired from your work toward peace? Has the world or the enemy been after you simply because you're a child of God? These are the struggles of belonging to one who does not belong to this world. The struggle is real, as the young people like to say. The struggle is real, and God knows it. And He responds with blessing. He responds with peace in our hearts. He responds with hope for our future. He responds with His presence when we are lonely, with His guidance when we are lost. The kingdom of heaven is yours. You will be comforted. You will be filled. You will be satisfied. You will be shown mercy. You will see God and will be known as his child. It doesn't make sense for us to be blessed. The blessings don't fit on this little planet. But boy, are we blessed. If you can't relate to that truth, hang on. Maybe you're getting a lot of fire from this world. Maybe you feel like you're getting fire at church. Well, hang on. Fire is easy, but rain, that can be 7 times harder to receive. But God said it was coming, didn't he? If you don't feel the blessings of the Beatitudes, hang on. God's got a plan to flip it. I looked up what the word beatitude means, and it is simply supreme blessedness. Blessedness, we get supreme. I mean above all else. Blessing above every other thing. That is what Jesus is talking about. When the world has you at odds because you have chosen him, he says you are blessed above everything else. I want to close today reading the Beatitudes from a newer translation. I think the message might sink in a little fresher for us as we struggle in this world that we don't really fit in. I'm going to read from the Message Bible. I want you to find peace in the promises of God. He keeps his promises. And he's looking to flip this world from fire to rain. You are blessed when you're at the end of your rope. With less of you, there is more of God and his rule. You are blessed when you feel you've lost what is most dear to you, because only then can you be embraced by the one most dear to you. You're blessed when you're content with just who you are, no more, no less. That's the moment you find yourselves proud owners of everything that can't be bought. You're blessed when you've worked up a good appetite for God. He is food and drink in the best meal you'll ever eat. You're blessed when you care. At the moment of being careful, you find yourselves cared for. You're blessed when you get your inside world, your mind and heart put right. Then you can see God in the outside world. You're blessed when you can show people how to cooperate instead of compete or fight. That's when you discover who you really are and your place in God's family. You're blessed when your commitment to God provokes persecution. The persecution drives you even deeper into God's kingdom. Not only that, count yourselves blessed every time people put you down or throw you out or speak lies about you to discredit me. What it means is that the truth is too close for comfort and they are uncomfortable. You can be glad when that happens. Give a cheer even. For though they don't like it, I do, says the Father. And all heaven applauds and know that you are in good company. My prophets and witnesses have always gotten into this kind of trouble. You are blessed. Let it rain.